It was the late evening of March 14, 2011, and Ethan Reynolds, a young journalist with a deep interest in abandoned places, stood on the edge of a secluded island in the Atlantic Ocean. Before him lay Blackstone Prison, a looming structure that had been standing for 500 years, shrouded in dark history. The thick fog wrapped around the prison, and the faintest glow from the half-hidden moon cast eerie shadows across the crumbling stone walls. The air was cold and still, carrying an unsettling quietness that seemed to press down on everything around him. Ethan had heard unsettling stories about the prison from the locals, a place known for its gruesome past. They whispered about the prisoners who had vanished without a trace, the chilling sounds of chains in the night, and the distant wails of souls lost to the prison's darkness. Most had left the island, fearing the spirits trapped within, but Ethan, determined to uncover the truth behind the eerie legends, pushed forward, eager to investigate the truth behind the rumors. As he stepped into the decaying prison, a deep sense of unease immediately took hold of him. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of his boots echoing in the empty hallways. The cold seemed to seep into his bones as he walked deeper into the darkened corridors. The prison was massive, the walls lined with cells that had long been abandoned. The further he ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. He felt as if the prison itself was alive, watching him, waiting for him to uncover its secrets. It was in the heart of the prison that Ethan found the record room, a room that had not seen the light of day for centuries. The shelves were filled with dusty ledgers and records from the past, their pages yellowed with age. As Ethan sifted through the documents, one name stood out: Samuel Jacks. His name appeared repeatedly, more than any other prisoner. A man accused of treason, sentenced to death, yet his record was oddly incomplete. Samuel Jacks was never executed. Instead, he was kept in the prison for years, his fate uncertain. No one knew what had happened to him, yet his name kept appearing in the logs, even long after the prison had been closed. Ethan's heart began to race as he flipped through the pages. The more he read, the more questions arose. Why had Samuel Jacks been kept alive when he should have been executed? What had happened to him? And why was he marked as "forbidden to die," a label no other prisoner carried? The air around Ethan seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the prison itself were responding to his curiosity. But the most unsettling discovery was buried in the final pages of the ledger, an entry so strange that Ethan's hands trembled as he read it. The record claimed that Samuel Jacks' soul had never left the prison. That, in some way, he was still trapped inside, bound to the prison's dark, decaying walls. Ethan's thoughts swirled as the reality of what he had discovered began to sink in. He was not just dealing with a forgotten chapter of history. He had uncovered something far darker, something that had remained hidden for centuries. Who was Samuel Jacks, and why was he never executed? Why does his name continue to appear in the records, even long after the prison's closure? What truly happened to him, and how is his spirit tied to the prison? To uncover the chilling truth behind these unanswered questions, make sure to like and subscribe. The deeper Ethan digs, the closer he gets to something far darker than he could ever imagine. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the ledger in his hands. The air felt thick, as if the prison itself were holding its breath, waiting for him to make the next move. The more he read about Samuel Jacks, the more questions formed in his mind. Who was this man, and why had he been kept alive after his sentence? What kind of punishment could have been so terrible that the records mentioned him as forbidden to die? The chilling thought that someone, or something, had kept this prisoner in the prison long after it had closed was too disturbing to ignore. Ethan's fingers trembled as he turned the page, his mind racing. The last entry in the record ledger mentioned a series of strange occurrences. Whispers in the dead of night. Cold drafts that moved through the prison's walls as if the building itself were alive. The unsettling mention of unfinished business tied to Samuel Jacks's name, suggesting that his death had not been the end of his story. As Ethan read, it became clear that Samuel Jacks was no ordinary prisoner. He had been part of something darker, something tied to the very foundation of the prison itself. With the unsettling discovery weighing heavily on his mind, Ethan decided to explore deeper into the prison. The record room, though filled with secrets, was only the beginning. As he moved through the dimly lit hallways, the sense of being watched intensified. Each step he took seemed to echo louder, reverberating through the vast, empty corridors. He could not shake the feeling that he was not alone. The further Ethan ventured, the more he noticed the strange markings etched into the walls. Symbols he could not recognize, carved into the stone, as if someone, or something, had used them to mark their territory. The closer he got to the heart of the prison, the more the atmosphere changed. The air felt thicker, the silence deeper, and the temperature dropped even further. He could feel the weight of the prison's history pressing down on him, suffocating him with every breath he took. In the deepest part of the prison, Ethan found something that sent a chill down his spine. A small, hidden room, barely noticeable behind a rusted door. As he pushed it open, the smell of decay and mold hit him instantly. Inside, there was an altar-like structure, surrounded by more symbols. The walls were lined with old, dusty objects, shackles, chains, and even remnants of old prison uniforms. But it was the object at the center of the room that caught his attention. A small, iron-bound chest sat on a pedestal, its surface covered in dark stains. Ethan's curiosity took over as he approached the chest. His hand hovered over it for a moment, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier. As if waiting for his decision. He had to open it. He felt it deep within himself. This was the key to everything, to understanding what had really happened to Samuel Jacks and why the prison felt so alive. With a deep breath, Ethan unlatched the chest. Inside, he found a small collection of items, letters, old photographs, and a single, weathered book. The book's cover was etched with more of the strange symbols that filled the prison. He flipped it open to the first page, and his eyes widened at the sight of the handwriting. It was Samuel Jacks's own words. The pages were filled with desperate, frantic scribbles. As Ethan read, he learned the horrifying truth: Samuel Jacks had not been forgotten by the prison, he had been chosen. Chosen for something far darker than anyone could understand. The book described a ritual, one that involved the prison's foundation, a connection to the earth itself, and the power to bind a soul forever. Samuel Jacks had not been left alive out of mercy, he had been kept alive to serve a purpose, to play a role in a ritual that would keep the prison's power intact. And now, Ethan had unwittingly become part of it. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something had gripped him from within. He turned quickly, his heart racing, but there was nothing there. The room, the walls, the very air felt as if they were closing in on him. It was as if the prison itself was alive, responding to his discovery, and it did not want him to learn any more. Why was Samuel Jacks chosen for such a ritual, and what role did the prison's foundation play in the curse that kept him alive? What will happen to Ethan now that he has discovered this dark secret? Will he be trapped just like the others? Ethan felt the air grow colder as he sat in the dimly lit room, the pages of the book in front of him growing heavier with each word he read. The prison, once a simple structure for punishment, had become something much more sinister. It had a life of its own, its walls soaked in blood and anguish. The name Samuel Jacks appeared again and again in the records, an inmate whose fate had been tied to the prison in ways far darker than any other. The book revealed the truth Ethan had been desperately trying to avoid. Samuel Jacks had not just been a prisoner, he was part of a dark ritual, one that tied the souls of the damned to the prison's foundations. The warden had sought immortality, and Jacks, along with many others, had been used as pawns in this twisted quest. The ritual was meant to keep the prison's power alive, and Jacks had been condemned to remain there, caught in an endless loop of torment. His death had never been the end, it was part of a cycle designed to feed the prison's cursed existence. The moment Ethan closed the book, the atmosphere around him shifted. The silence grew louder, almost suffocating. He could feel the prison's presence pressing in from all sides. It was as if the walls themselves were aware of his discovery, aware that he now held the key to its darkest secret. He looked up, scanning the room for any sign of movement, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet the feeling of being watched only intensified. The shadows in the room shifted, not in the way shadows should, but as if something was moving within them. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and a chill ran down Ethan's spine. His heart began to race, not from fear, but from a deep, gut-wrenching understanding. The prison was alive, or at least, it was connected to something that had been alive. Ethan knew he had disturbed something ancient, something that had been waiting for him. Without thinking, he turned to leave, but as his hand reached for the door, it slammed shut with an explosive force. Ethan jumped back, his breath catching in his throat. The once silent hallways now echoed with distant whispers, muffled at first, then growing louder. They were not voices he could understand, but the feeling of being surrounded by unseen figures was undeniable. The prison had reacted to him, and it would not let him leave. Panicked, Ethan scrambled for the door, trying to force it open, but it would not budge. The walls around him groaned, as if the very building itself was shifting. The whispers became clearer, forming words in his mind, voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He couldn't escape them. The air grew colder still, and the shadows seemed to come alive, reaching out for him. He backed into the center of the room, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ethan's thoughts raced as the room seemed to close in on him. The whispers grew more insistent, more frantic, urging him to leave, to escape before it was too late. But the realization hit him hard, there was no escape. The prison had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others before him. What is the source of the voices that Ethan is hearing? Why is the prison reacting to him now, and what has he awakened by uncovering its secrets? To find out what Ethan uncovers in the heart of the prison, make sure to like and subscribe. The truth is darker than he ever could have imagined. Ethan's breath became shallow as he stepped back from the door, the weight of the book's revelation pressing heavily on him. The room felt unnaturally cold, the silence suffocating. His flashlight flickered, casting long, shaky shadows on the walls of the prison, which seemed to groan under the weight of years of decay. The eerie whispers had stopped, but Ethan still felt their presence, lingering in the space, waiting. He wiped his hands on his pants, his fingers trembling, but it was more than fear, it was a feeling of being trapped, caught in something much larger than he could understand. He had uncovered the truth, the ritual, the curse that had bound the souls of the prisoners to this place. Samuel Jacks, the man at the center of it all, had been part of something far darker than just a twisted prison system. But the more he thought about it, the more unsettling it became. Why had the curse not been broken? Why had it been allowed to fester for so long? Ethan's stomach churned with the realization that he was no longer just a visitor to this place, he had become part of its dark history. Ethan moved towards the door, his mind racing with questions he was afraid to answer. The moment his hand touched the handle, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut. He jumped back, heart racing. The prison had reacted to him, like it knew he had uncovered its secrets, and it did not want him to leave. He turned and quickly scanned the room, but there was nothing there, just the dim glow of his flashlight bouncing off the stone walls. The silence returned, but it felt heavier this time, more oppressive. Ethan's gut twisted as he realized that something was not right. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was too real to ignore. He had to get out. He could not stay here any longer. But the more he tried to leave, the harder it became. The corridors of the prison were shifting, changing. He walked through one hallway, only to find that it led back to where he started. He turned around, trying another path, but it was the same. The prison was alive, or at least, it was reacting to him in ways he did not fully understand. Every step he took felt like he was walking in circles. Panic set in. Was it the curse? Was the prison trying to keep him? The whispers had returned, faint but persistent, as if the walls themselves were speaking to him. Ethan moved quickly down another corridor, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to keep moving. He needed to get out before he lost his mind, before the darkness swallowed him whole. In the distance, he thought he saw a flicker of light. His eyes locked onto it, and for a moment, it felt like a beacon of hope, something real in the midst of this nightmare. He pushed forward, moving faster, his legs burning with the effort. As he neared the light, he realized it was coming from a small room up ahead. A storage closet? A cell? Ethan reached the door, feeling an odd pull to it, as though it had been waiting for him. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The whispers were louder now, more urgent, but he could not make out the words. The moment his hand touched the handle, the door swung open, and a cold rush of air hit him in the face. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him. Inside, the room was small and cramped. The walls were lined with old, rusted chains and tattered remnants of what looked like old prison uniforms. But there was something else, something far darker, at the center of the room. A small, wooden chair, chained to the floor. It looked ordinary enough, but there was a dark stain on the seat, something that had been there for far too long. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face as he realized what he was looking at. The chair was not just a piece of furniture. It was part of the ritual, the same ritual that had kept Samuel Jacks trapped here for centuries. Ethan took a step forward, his flashlight illuminating the stain, and that's when he saw it, etched into the floor, barely visible, were the same symbols he had seen in the prison records. They were not random markings. They were part of a larger design, a map that had been drawn to trap the souls of the prisoners. His pulse quickened. This was the key. This chair, the symbols, it all connected. Samuel Jacks had not just been a prisoner. He had been used, sacrificed as part of the ritual to bind the souls of the dead to the prison's walls. But why? What was the purpose of it all? And why had the prison not been destroyed, as it should have been after all these years? As Ethan bent down to examine the symbols, the room seemed to close in around him. The temperature dropped even further, and a chill ran up his spine. The whispers had returned, now so loud that they seemed to reverberate inside his skull. He turned around quickly, his eyes scanning the room, but there was no one there. He reached out to touch one of the symbols when suddenly, the ground beneath him shook violently. The walls groaned, and the light from his flashlight flickered. He stumbled backward, his heart racing, as the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The shadows grew darker, stretching toward him, closing in. Something was coming. What does the chair in the room truly symbolize? Is Ethan really alone, or are the spirits of the prison coming for him? Ethan's heart raced as he read the final passage in the book. The prison was more than just a place of punishment, it was a vessel. A place where souls had been trapped, bound by a dark ritual to keep the prison's power alive. The name Samuel Jacks haunted every page. This prisoner had never been executed. His soul had been kept alive, bound to the very walls of the prison. Ethan could feel the weight of his discovery pressing on him. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the prison itself was aware of the truth he had uncovered. The whispers that had been a faint echo now seemed to surround him. They grew louder, filling the space with words he could not understand but somehow felt in his bones. He set the book down, looking around the room, but there was no escape. The whispers intensified, the shadows in the corners of the room deepening, almost as though they were alive. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but something held him there. The prison was responding to him, drawing him further in. As he reached for the door, it slammed shut with an unnatural force. Ethan's pulse quickened. The room felt different now, alive, like it had been waiting for this moment. The walls groaned as if they were shifting, the very structure of the prison twisting to trap him inside. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, filling his head with images of pain and despair. Ethan moved quickly, his mind racing. He had to get out, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, leading him in circles. No matter how far he walked, he always ended up back in the same place. The prison had become a maze. A maze with no exit. He turned around, but the walls were closing in on him, the whispers now louder than ever. The dark figures in the corners of his vision grew more defined, their shapes flickering in and out of view. In that moment, Ethan understood. The prison was not merely haunted, it was alive. It had been feeding off the pain and suffering of its prisoners for centuries, and now, it had claimed him as its next victim. The ghosts of the past, the souls trapped by the prison's curse, were waking up. And they wanted something from him. His flashlight flickered, casting brief, shaky beams of light across the hallway. Ethan's breathing quickened as he tried to find his way out. The oppressive weight of the prison was too much. It was as if the walls themselves were pushing him deeper into the heart of the building. He turned another corner and found himself face to face with a figure, a shadow moving toward him in the darkness. For a moment, Ethan froze. The figure was tall, its features indistinguishable, but there was no mistaking the cold, oppressive presence it carried. It was Samuel Jacks, or at least, a manifestation of him. His face was gaunt, his eyes empty pits, and his body was covered in tattered clothing. His appearance seemed to flicker, as if the figure was made of shadows, but the presence was real, suffocating. The figure did not speak. Instead, it reached out, its hand like a ghostly mist. Ethan took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure's hand stopped just short of touching him, but the air around him became heavy, thick with the force of its will. Ethan could feel the cold seeping into his bones, as if the prison's curse was trying to claim him, to pull him into its depths. With the last of his strength, Ethan turned and ran, his footsteps echoing through the endless corridors. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, the air growing thinner. He could hear the whispers again, louder now, almost like they were speaking his name. He glanced over his shoulder, but the figure was gone. The hallway ahead of him stretched into darkness, and he knew one thing for sure: he was trapped. Why does the prison seem to target Ethan now that he has uncovered its secret? What is the true purpose of Samuel Jack's ghost, and how does his curse tie to the rest of the prisoners? The room around Ethan grew colder, the air thick with an energy that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. The faces of the prisoners, their hollow eyes staring back at him from the walls, seemed to grow clearer, sharper, as though they were moving toward him. The whispers that filled the air were no longer just distant voices, they were now clear, distinct, and filled with emotion. Ethan's head throbbed with each passing second, the voices growing louder, more desperate. He stumbled back, the box in his hands shaking violently. The light it had emitted still lingered in his vision, blinding him with its intensity. But as the light faded, the room returned to its eerie dimness, and Ethan found himself standing in the middle of the prison's deepest secret. The symbols on the floor, the ones he had seen earlier, were no longer just etched into the stone. They were glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the whispers. Ethan's thoughts raced. What had he uncovered? This was not just a cursed prison. It was a place where the souls of the damned were trapped, bound by a dark, ancient ritual. The box, the symbols, the faces on the walls, they were all connected. But how? What was the purpose of all this suffering, and what role did he play in it? Was he simply a witness, or had his presence here awakened something far more dangerous? He turned to leave, but before he could move, he heard it, a sound so faint, so subtle at first, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps. Not from the corridors outside, but from within the room. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan turned, his eyes darting to the shadows. He was not alone. The prison's curse had not just been awakened. It was alive, and it was reaching out for him. A figure materialized from the darkness, its form barely visible at first, but as it stepped into the light, Ethan saw him, Samuel Jacks, his figure more solid than before, his eyes wide with anger and sorrow. His form flickered like a flame in the wind, but there was no mistaking the malevolent force that radiated from him. Ethan froze, unable to move. Samuel Jacks stepped forward, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and rage. The prison, it seemed, had claimed him fully, and now he was the guardian of its curse, the keeper of its secret. Ethan could feel the power emanating from the spirit, and it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "You should have never come here," Samuel's voice echoed, though it was not just a voice, it was a feeling, a deep resonance that filled Ethan's bones. "You have disturbed the balance. You have disturbed us all." Ethan tried to speak, to explain himself, but no words came. The air was thick, suffocating, and as Samuel Jack stepped closer, the room seemed to close in around him. The walls grew tighter, the space shrinking with each passing second. The prison was alive, and now, it had claimed him. Samuel's voice broke the silence again, his tone filled with sorrow. We were never meant to escape. We were never meant to be freed. The curse binds us to this place, to these walls. And now, you will join us. You will become one of us. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had uncovered the truth, but the truth had led him here, to this moment. Samuel Jack's ghost, once a prisoner, had now become the prison's eternal keeper. The souls of the others, trapped within the walls, were his to command. They were bound to the prison, and so was Samuel, forced to watch, to wait, for anyone foolish enough to stumble into this cursed place. Ethan turned quickly, desperate to escape, but before he could move, the walls shifted again, blocking his path. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the temperature dropped even further. He could feel the presence of the souls, their anger, their pain, closing in on him. The door to the room slammed shut with a deafening crash, and the darkness seemed to swallow Ethan whole. His flashlight flickered one last time before dying completely. The shadows consumed him, and for a moment, he could see nothing but the void. But then, a faint light appeared. It was coming from the other side of the room, shining through a crack in the stone. Ethan moved toward it, his steps hesitant, as if the very air itself was fighting against him. He reached the crack, his fingers brushing against the cold stone, and as he pressed harder, the crack widened. Through the opening, he saw it, a glimpse of freedom. The world outside, untouched by the prison's curse. But it was not just freedom he saw. The shadows, the whispers, the souls, they were all behind him, reaching for him, calling his name. Will Ethan be able to escape the prison, or is he now forever bound to its curse? What will happen to the souls trapped within the walls of Blackstone Prison, and what does Samuel Jack truly want from Ethan? Ethan's footsteps echoed down the narrow corridor as he moved deeper into the heart of Blackstone Prison. The weight of what he had uncovered sat heavily on his chest, but there was no turning back now. The prison had already made its intentions clear. It had drawn him in with its mysteries, its secrets, and now it was claiming him as part of its twisted history. The air grew colder with every step he took, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. His flashlight flickered, casting long shadows against the cracked stone walls, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move in the corner of his vision. A figure. But when he turned, there was nothing there. The prison was toying with him, its curse pulling him deeper into its grip. Ethan reached the end of the hall, where a small door stood, slightly ajar. It seemed ordinary enough, yet something about it felt different. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was unlike the others he had explored. It was not decayed or forgotten, it was pristine, untouched, as though time had forgotten this place entirely. The walls were lined with old portraits, their faces twisted in expressions of pain and sorrow. At the center of the room, there was an altar, ancient and worn. On it lay a small chest, its surface covered in strange symbols. Ethan felt a sense of dread wash over him as he stepped forward, his pulse quickening. He could hear the whispers again, louder now, almost frantic. They seemed to be coming from all around him, urging him to stop, to turn back before it was too late. But Ethan could not turn back. He had come too far. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the chest. The moment his fingers made contact, the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned, the floor beneath him vibrated, and the temperature dropped even further. The whispers grew louder, filling his ears with a maddening chorus of voices. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something cold and invisible had pierced his very soul. He stumbled backward, his vision blurring as he gasped for air. The shadows around him deepened, and he could feel the weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on him. The curse of the prison was not just a legend, it was real, and it was alive. As he struggled to stay on his feet, a figure appeared before him, Samuel Jax, his form flickering in and out of the darkness. The ghost was no longer the pale, translucent figure it had been before. It was solid now, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. Samuel Jax reached out, his hand hovering in the air, and for a moment, Ethan felt as though his very soul was being drawn toward the ghost. "You should not have come here," Samuel Jax's voice rumbled, deep and cold. "The prison is not a place for the living. It has claimed us all, and now it will claim you." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice failed him. His throat felt dry, his heart hammering in his chest as he realized the true horror of the prison. It was not just a prison for the body, it was a prison for the soul. The ghosts of the past were trapped here, bound by the curse, their suffering feeding the prison's dark power. The air around him grew even colder, and Ethan could feel the presence of countless other spirits, their eyes watching him from the shadows. He knew now that there was no escaping this place. The prison had claimed him, and no matter how hard he tried, he would never leave. The walls shook again, and the chest on the altar began to glow, its symbols pulsing with dark energy. Ethan turned, desperate to escape, but the room seemed to shift around him. The door he had entered through was now gone, replaced by solid stone. There was no way out. He was trapped. Samuel Jax's figure stepped closer, his form flickering in and out of existence as if the very fabric of the prison was bending around him. "The only way to escape," the ghost whispered, "is to become one with us. To join us in the eternal cycle. Only then will the curse be broken. Only then will you be free." Ethan's mind raced. The truth was clearer now. The curse of Blackstone Prison was not just a myth. It was a reality that had been feeding on the souls of the damned for centuries. And now, he was a part of it. What will Ethan do now that he is trapped in the heart of the prison? Can he find a way to break the curse, or will he become another lost soul within Blackstone Prison? To find out what happens next, make sure to like and subscribe. The darkness that Ethan faces is not finished. Ethan's body shook as the cold of the prison seemed to invade his very bones. His hands gripped the stone pedestal tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded in reality. Samuel Jax stood before him, his figure now more solid than ever, his eyes burning with an intensity that sent chills down Ethan's spine. The ghost was no longer a faint presence in the shadows, it was a force, one that emanated a power Ethan could feel in every corner of the room. Ethan's mind was racing. The truth had become clear. The prison was not just haunted. It was alive, and it had trapped the souls of those who had passed through its walls, binding them to its dark power. The curse was not just an ancient tale, it was the essence of the prison itself. Samuel Jax, once a prisoner, was now part of the prison, a keeper of its dark secrets, a soul trapped for eternity. The realization hit Ethan hard. He had been brought here for a reason. The prison had drawn him in, fed on his curiosity, and now, it was demanding a price. The door he had entered through was gone, replaced by solid stone. There was no escape. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing tighter, the air thicker. The whispers, once distant and faint, now filled his mind, growing louder, sharper, each one pushing him closer to the truth he had uncovered. He glanced at the chest on the altar. The strange symbols still glowed faintly, their pulsing light casting eerie shadows across the room. The energy in the room was palpable, suffocating, as if the very walls were alive with the souls of the damned. Ethan could feel the weight of their gaze, the sense of being watched, even though the room appeared empty. Samuel Jax's voice broke the silence, low and grave. The ghost's form flickered as though it were caught between two worlds, his words carrying a weight of sorrow and anger. The curse was real. There was no way around it. The prison had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. The faces of the prisoners, their eyes hollow and desperate, appeared in Ethan's mind. Their souls were trapped here, forever bound to the prison's cruel grip. Ethan's mind was racing, but there was one thought that kept repeating in his head. There had to be a way out. He could not become another lost soul, another prisoner of this place. He had come to uncover the truth, to reveal the secrets of Blackstone Prison, but now, those secrets were threatening to consume him. The question was clear. Was there a way to break the curse, or was he doomed to join the others? As he reached for the chest, something strange happened. The room seemed to tilt, the shadows warping around him. The chest began to vibrate, its symbols glowing brighter, almost as if reacting to his touch. The air grew thick, and the whispers turned into voices, shouting, pleading, and calling to him. The voices grew louder, filling his mind with visions of endless torment. The pain, the suffering of the souls trapped in this place, was overwhelming. The room spun around him, the weight of the curse pressing against him from all sides. The last thing he remembered was the feeling of his hand touching the chest. The moment his fingers brushed against it, everything went black. What happens when Ethan touches the chest? Is he about to be consumed by the curse, or is there still hope for him? Ethan's vision blurred as his hand touched the chest. The overwhelming force of the curse seemed to pour into him, flooding his mind with images of the past, of pain and suffering. It was as if the prison had claimed him, pulling him into its depths. His head spun, and for a moment, he felt as though he was falling into an abyss, consumed by the darkness of the prison. But then, suddenly, the flood of images stopped. The oppressive weight on his chest lifted, and for a brief moment, Ethan could breathe again. His eyes opened slowly, and he realized he was no longer in the same room. The walls, the dark figures, the echoes of the prison's curse, they were gone. He was standing in a space that felt almost real, but the air was still thick with an unsettling tension. He looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The space was dim, a strange half-light illuminating the shadows around him. There were no more whispers, no more cries for help. The silence was absolute, but it was not comforting, it was suffocating. Ethan's heart pounded as he tried to understand what had happened. Had the curse been broken? Had he freed the souls trapped within the prison? Or had he only awakened something far darker? He turned and saw a figure standing before him. It was Samuel Jacks, but not as Ethan had seen him before. The ghostly figure was no longer flickering in and out of existence. It was solid, its features sharp and defined, its eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Samuel's form was still surrounded by an aura of darkness, but now there was a clarity in his gaze, a recognition of Ethan. Ethan took a step forward, unsure of what to say. He had uncovered the truth about the prison, about the curse, but there was still so much left unanswered. Was this the end? Was Samuel Jacks finally free, or was there more to this story? The ghost stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Ethan. Then, without speaking, Samuel raised his hand. A soft light began to glow from within the ghost's palm, and for the first time, Ethan felt a sense of peace, a calmness that seemed to spread throughout the room. The darkness that had once filled the prison seemed to recede, and the air grew warmer. The chill that had gripped Ethan's body for so long melted away, and the oppressive weight he had been carrying for so long began to lift. The room began to change. The walls, once cracked and broken, now seemed to heal before Ethan's eyes. The stone turned smooth, and the faded symbols on the walls grew vibrant, as though they were coming to life. The oppressive energy that had once filled the prison seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of calm. The curse was lifting. Samuel's voice, once raspy and filled with sorrow, now held a note of peace. "You have freed us," the ghost said, his voice soft but powerful. "The prison's curse is broken. The souls trapped here, including mine, are free to move on." Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had done it. He had broken the curse that had haunted this prison for centuries. The souls of the prisoners, including Samuel Jacks, were no longer trapped. They were free. But as the ghost began to fade, Ethan felt a wave of sadness wash over him. Samuel Jacks had been a victim of the prison's dark history, just as the other souls had been. He had been a prisoner, bound by the curse for far too long. And now, as the ghost faded from view, Ethan understood. This was not just a victory, it was a final goodbye. Samuel's last words echoed in Ethan's mind as the ghost disappeared into the light. "You are free now. Thank you." Ethan stood alone in the now silent room, the weight of what he had accomplished sinking in. The prison, once alive with curses and suffering, was now quiet. The souls of the past had moved on, and the prison, stripped of its power, was nothing more than a crumbling relic of a dark past. Ethan stepped toward the exit, his mind still processing everything that had happened. The curse had been broken. The souls had been freed. And now, he was free to leave. As he exited the prison, the sun was beginning to rise in the distance, the first rays of light breaking through the heavy fog that had surrounded the island. For the first time since his arrival, the air felt clear. The weight that had been on his shoulders had lifted. The darkness that had surrounded him was gone. What does Ethan do now that the curse has been broken? Will the prison remain abandoned, or will it stand as a reminder of the dark forces that once held it together? The morning sun broke through the dense fog as Ethan stepped outside the ruins of Blackstone Prison. The weight that had been pressing on him for days, the curse that had haunted the prison and its souls, had lifted. The air was fresh, and the stillness of the island felt almost peaceful, as if the land itself was healing. The once dark and foreboding prison now stood as nothing more than an abandoned shell, its power gone, its curse broken. Ethan took one last look at the crumbling building. The stories that had haunted it for centuries had been uncovered, the truth revealed. The spirits that had once been trapped there, bound to the prison by a dark ritual, had found their peace. And with that peace came a sense of closure that Ethan had not expected to feel. He had come here seeking answers, but he had found something far more valuable: redemption. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, seeing a message from his editor. The story he had been investigating was now complete. But for Ethan, it was more than just a story, it had been a journey into the unknown, a journey that had changed him. He had faced fear, discovered the hidden history of Blackstone Prison, and had come out on the other side with answers, and a deeper understanding of the darkness that had once held this place in its grip. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past week finally release from his shoulders. He had survived the horrors of Blackstone Prison, and now, it was time to leave it behind. The sun was fully up now, casting light over the island, and for the first time, Ethan felt free. If you have enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot to me, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching this story from?